The red light on the A7 microburst transmitter was not supposed to blink. Its design parameters, specified in a 386-page technical manual Eli Cohen had memorized with the same religious fervor a rabbi reserves for the Talmud, were unequivocal. During the 4.7-second transmission window, a solid, unwavering green indicated a successful cryptographic handshake with the listening post on the snow-capped peak of Mount Hermon. Green meant a clean, unidirectional signal path, a digital whisper across 60 kilometers of hostile territory. Green meant the intelligence was received, verified, and he was, for another 24 hours, safe. Blinking red was an error code that appeared in only one subsection of the manual, under a chapter titled Extreme Prejudice Countermeasures. It meant active signal reflection, not passive atmospheric distortion or solar flare interference, but a focused, coherent energy source being directed at his transmission. It indicated a Doppler shift inconsistent with a static source, meaning the opposing system was not just listening, but actively painting his location with a phased array antenna, triangulating. The digital clock on the desk, a Patek Philippe gifted to him by a Swiss diplomat whose government secretly favored a stable Israel, read 02:14:17 a.m. Damascus was silent, a city holding its breath under the Ba'athist regime's iron fist. The only sounds the distant drone of a municipal generator and the sharp, territorial bark of a stray dog. Inside apartment 601 of the affluent Abu Rumaneh district, the man the world knew as Kamel Amin Thabet, patriot, philanthropist, and confidant to the powerful, stared at the blinking red light. His heart, a traitorous organ, hammered against his ribs, a frantic, asynchronous drumbeat against the perfect stillness of the room. The intelligence he had just sent, compressed into a data packet of 1.2 megabits using a proprietary algorithm developed at the Weizmann Institute, was the culmination of 3 years of relentless, nerve-shredding work. It was a complete schematic and order of battle for the Syrian fortifications on the Golan Heights. Every bunker's concrete thickness, every artillery position's pre-sighted firing zone, every tank trap's GPS coordinate, every minefield density map calculated to the square meter. It was the key to Israel's survival in the inevitable next war. And the transmission of that key had just turned his elegantly furnished apartment into a beacon, screaming his exact location to every Soviet-made Krug radio direction-finding van in the city. He had 2 protocols for this exact scenario, drilled into him by Yitzhak Shamir himself in a soundproofed basement in Tel Aviv until they were not just memory, but instinct. Protocol Alpha: emergency egress. Dismantle the A7 unit into its 3 core components: transmitter, encryption module, power converter. Submerge them in the prepared bath of hydrochloric acid, concealed within the S-bend of the sink's plumbing. The fuming acid would dissolve the delicate silicon wafers and gold-plated circuitry into an unidentifiable green-black sludge in under 90 seconds. Simultaneously, ignite the one-time pads and codebooks in a thermite-lined burn bag that would incinerate them at 2,200 degrees Celsius, leaving only fine, sterile ash. Walk out the door with nothing but the clothes on his back, a set of forged Lebanese identity papers, and a cyanide capsule embedded in a molar. He would become a ghost, heading for a prearranged extraction point 70 kilometers away on the Lebanese border, a 3-night journey on foot through hostile territory patrolled by Bedouin trackers and Syrian army regulars. Protocol Bravo: maintain normalcy. Continue transmitting. Send the prearranged verification and sign-off codes. Act as if nothing is wrong. The blinking red light could, in a 1 in a million probability, be a sophisticated new form of atmospheric jamming being tested by the Soviets. It could be a technical malfunction in the A7's reflection sensor, a microscopic fracture in the gallium arsenide substrate. Aborting the mission on a false alarm would be unforgivable. Not only would the intelligence remain unverified by the receiving station, but his sudden disappearance would confirm the existence of a high-level spy, triggering a counterintelligence hurricane that would destroy Mossad's entire Syrian network, painstakingly built over a decade. His handler's voice, recorded in his memory from a training session, was ice-cold and devoid of emotion. Doubt is the agent's disease. Paranoia is the symptom. Protocol is the cure. Trust the protocol, not your fear. He had 10 seconds to choose. 10 seconds before the Syrian Mukhabarat's electronic warfare division could cross-reference the signals from at least 3 separate Krug vans and get a definitive lock with a margin of error of less than 5 meters. 9. He glanced at the framed photograph on his desk. A smiling man, arm in arm with Syrian Defense Minister Amin al-Hafiz. That man was him. Kamal Amin Thabet, a patriot, a friend to the regime. A man above suspicion. 8. The blinking accelerated, the interval shortening from 500 milliseconds to 300. A clear sign the incoming signal was strengthening. Their systems were narrowing the search grid with each reflected pulse. There was no malfunction. They were close. 7. His hand hovered over the recessed trigger mechanism for the acid bath, a smooth, unmarked button hidden beneath the lip of his mahogany desk. A single press would doom the mission's verification, but might save his life. 6. He thought of the eucalyptus trees, the detail he had suggested to the Syrian generals on his last tour of the Golan. For shade, he'd said, his voice laced with the concern of a patriot for his nation's soldiers. For your brave men, General, to protect them from the sun. The generals, flattered by his solicitude and impressed by his modern thinking, had loved it. They had ordered them planted immediately. Each fast-growing tree, now standing sentinel next to a hardened, camouflaged artillery bunker, was a marker, a perfect living bullseye for Israeli artillery spotters and fighter pilots, visible from miles away. That detail, the exact coordinates of every single tree, was in the final block of the transmission. 5. Protocol Alpha meant his own survival. Protocol Bravo meant confirming the intelligence was received and understood, a final, vital handshake, even if it cost him everything. 4. The entire operation, codenamed Damocles for the sword hanging over Israel's head, hinged on this data. Without it, hundreds, maybe thousands of Israeli soldiers would die trying to take the high ground in a frontal assault against an invisible, perfectly prepared enemy. 3. He made his choice. His fingers didn't move towards the acid bath. They moved back to the Morse key, its cool, polished brass a familiar anchor in the storm of his adrenaline. 2. He began tapping out the verification sequence. VERCOMP. A short, sharp burst of code that said, "Message sent is complete and accurate." It was also his final goodbye, a prearranged signal to Tel Aviv that he was compromised beyond recovery, and his mission was over. 1. The blinking red light turned solid, a constant, screaming crimson. It meant they had him. The lock was absolute. Far below his window, in the silent street, the sound of heavy diesel truck engines roared to life, their gears grinding with brutal finality. They were coming. The game was over. But the mission, he knew with absolute certainty, was a success. To understand how a man could find himself in a Damascus apartment, willingly broadcasting his own death warrant, you have to go back to the source. Back to the sterile, windowless briefing rooms of Mossad headquarters on King Saul Boulevard in Tel Aviv, where the plan was born not out of strategic ambition, but out of existential desperation. The year is 1960. The map on the wall of Mayor Amit's office tells the entire story. Israel is a sliver of a nation, an elongated geographical improbability surrounded by enemies sworn to its destruction. To the north, Syria. And from the Golan Heights, a formidable 40-mile-long plateau of volcanic rock. Syrian guns rain down shells on the kibbutzim and farms of northern Galilee. Every planting season is a gamble with 122mm howitzers. Every harvest is a potential funeral procession. The intelligence on the Golan is a black hole. It is a fortress, designed by Soviet military engineers, its construction overseen by GRU advisors. It is guarded by the most loyal units of the Syrian army, men for whom ideology and hatred of Israel are interchangeable. Previous attempts to infiltrate have ended in catastrophic failure. In 1957, Operation Shaked, an attempt to insert a small team of Sayeret Matkal commandos to map the forward defense line, resulted in the entire team being captured after a firefight. Their bodies were returned a month later in burlap sacks, marked agricultural supplies. In 1959, a Druze agent, recruited in the villages near the border, was turned by the Mukhabarat. He fed Tel Aviv meticulously crafted disinformation for 6 months, reporting fake fortifications and non-existent troop movements. The cost of this deception was a disastrously inaccurate map that led an Israeli Golani Brigade patrol into a newly laid minefield. The losses were mounting. The intelligence was worse than non-existent. It was poison. The man tasked with solving this impossible problem was Meir Amit, the newly appointed director of Mossad. Amit was not a spy in the traditional sense. He was a soldier, a systems analyst, a pragmatist who saw the world as a series of interlocking problems requiring logical, often brutal, solutions. His record was impeccable. As head of military intelligence, Amen, he had revolutionized data analysis, creating systems to predict enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. He believed in technology, in systems, but most of all, he believed in the power of a single, perfectly placed human asset. His philosophy, which he repeated at every staff meeting, was simple. We need to have a man standing in the president's office who can hear what is being said and report it back to us before the president has even finished his coffee. It was considered fantasy by the old guard. Amit considered it a baseline requirement for national survival. His chief of operations for this new plan was Yitzhak Shamir, a man forged in the fires of the pre-state underground. Where Amit was a systematic thinker, Shamir was a creature of instinct and shadow. A former operations chief of the militant group Lehi, he had a reputation for absolute ruthlessness and an almost supernatural understanding of tradecraft. Flashback. Rome, 1948. The war for Israel's independence is raging. Shamir, then known as Michael, is hunting a former British intelligence officer who supplied arms to Arab militias. The target is holed up in a cheap pensione near the Termini station. Surveillance is impossible. The neighborhood is crawling with carabinieri. Shamir doesn't use a team. He acquires a plumber's uniform and a toolbox. He walks into the building, tells the concierge he's there to fix a leak on the top floor, and is waved through. He finds the target's room, picks the simple lock in seconds. The Englishman is asleep. Shamir doesn't use a gun. The noise is a liability. He uses a garrote fashioned from piano wire. It is silent and absolute. He is out of the building in under 5 minutes. But his work isn't done. The Englishman had a network. To protect his own assets, Shamir needs to create a ghost. He spends the next 2 days meticulously planting evidence. Forged letters, a train ticket to Naples, a witness who saw the target leave with a woman. That suggests the Englishman fled with a lover and a suitcase full of money. He isn't just eliminating a target. He is rewriting reality. This was his specialty, creating legends. Lohamim, he called them, warriors. False identities so complete, so detailed, that they could withstand any scrutiny. He believed a good cover wasn't just a story. It was a new reality you built for the agent and for the world, brick by painstaking brick. The third man in the room was Shlomo Kedem, head of Tevel, the division responsible for liaison with Allied intelligence services. Kedem was the diplomat, the networker. His job was to provide the logistical infrastructure for the operation outside of Israel, to use the agency's contacts in friendly nations to create the building blocks of the legend Shamir would design. He was the master of the logistical supply chain of espionage, capable of producing a birth certificate in Beirut, a bank account in Geneva, and a business license in Buenos Aires, all flawlessly backdated and verifiable. These 3 men formed the core of what would become Operation Damocles. The geopolitical chessboard was terrifyingly complex. Syria, under the volatile leadership of the Ba'ath Party, was becoming more aggressive. Flush with Soviet money and military hardware, they were accelerating their program to divert the headwaters of the Jordan River, the Banias and Hasbani rivers, an action that would cripple Israeli agriculture and constitute a casus belli. Intelligence reports, fragmented and unreliable, spoke of new Soviet-supplied MiG-21 F-13 fighter jets arriving at Damascus airfields, and the installation of SA-2 guideline anti-aircraft missile batteries. There were whispers of long-range 130-meter artillery pieces being installed on the Golan. The shelling of the kibbutz Ein Gev on May 16, 1961, was the final trigger. A Syrian 120-meter howitzer shell landed directly on the community's dining hall during lunch. 17 people were killed, including 4 children. It was a massacre. The situation was further complicated by the covert activities of other powers. The CIA's Beirut station was running a massive operation, codenamed Project Strife, to undermine Soviet influence in the region, flooding the black market with cash and weapons that often ended up in the wrong hands. Concurrently, the KGB was aggressively trying to recruit assets within the Syrian military, a campaign which made the Mukhabarat hyper-vigilant, seeing potential spies around every corner. Mossad was navigating a minefield, where a single misstep could not only compromise their own operation, but also be misconstrued as an American plot, potentially triggering an international incident. Mayor Amit called an emergency meeting. The mission genesis was stark. Amit laid out the facts, his voice flat and hard. "Our aerial reconnaissance is useless," he stated, pointing to a series of blurry, inconclusive photos. The new Soviet SA-2 systems they're installing make high-altitude flights impossible, and low-altitude flights are suicide. Our human intelligence on the ground is zero. We are blind. The Ein Gev attack will not be the last. It is a test. They are testing our defenses, our response time, and our resolve. The next attack will be bigger. They are planning something, a coordinated assault, and we will not see it coming. Shamir spoke next, his voice a low rasp. We need our own man, not a recruited local who can be threatened or bought, not a Druze from the border, one of our own, a Mabat, a combatant from the inside. We build him from the ground up. The profile of the agent required was near impossible. He had to be a native Arabic speaker, but with a specific Levantine accent that was not Israeli or Palestinian. He had to be able to pass for a Syrian, to understand the culture, the politics, the subtle social cues from the inside. He had to possess a photographic memory, immense courage, and the patience of a stone. Most of all, he had to be willing to spend years, maybe a decade, completely alone, severed from his home, his family, his very identity. The search began. They combed through the files of every soldier, every academic, every immigrant. They were looking for a unicorn. They found him in a Tel Aviv accounting office, working for a chain of department stores. His name was Eli Cohen. Born in Alexandria, Egypt, to Syrian Jewish parents from Aleppo, he was a perfect linguistic and cultural match. He had been involved in Zionist activities in Egypt during the 1950s and had helped smuggle Jews to Israel after the Suez Crisis. He was intelligent, quiet, and fiercely patriotic. He had applied to Mossad twice before and been rejected. The psychological profile from 1958 deemed him too cautious, possessing an overstated sense of his own importance and a tendency toward introversion. But Amit's new regime saw something different. They saw his caution as the patience required for deep cover work. They saw his self-importance as the supreme confidence needed to maintain a high-level cover under pressure. The rejection had wounded his pride, making him eager to prove himself. He was the perfect candidate, skilled, motivated, and malleable. The initial approach was subtle. A business opportunity from a government-connected import-export company. Cohen, bored with his life as a bookkeeper, was intrigued. The interviews were grueling. Weeks of psychological tests, memory challenges, polygraphs, and simulated interrogations in a mock prison. They broke him down and rebuilt him, probing for any weakness, any crack in his psyche. They tested his loyalty, his breaking point, his ability to lie convincingly under extreme pressure. He passed every test. When Mayor Amit finally sat him down and told him the true nature of the mission, he didn't hesitate. He said yes. The transformation of Eli Cohen into Kamel Amin Thabet began. It was a masterclass in Shamir's doctrine of creating a new reality. First, the legend. Kamel Amin Thabet would be a wealthy textile magnate from a prominent Syrian family that had emigrated to Argentina after the First World War. He was a passionate Syrian nationalist, a bon vivant, eager to return to his homeland and contribute to its glory under the new Ba'athist regime. Argentina was chosen specifically. It had a large, thriving, and politically active Syrian expatriate community, a perfect environment to build and season the cover story. For an entire year, Cohen lived in Buenos Aires. Mossad's logistical network, activated by Kedem, worked flawlessly. They established a legitimate import-export business for him, complete with shipping manifests and tax records. They rented him a lavish apartment in the exclusive Palermo district. They filled his bank accounts with untraceable funds channeled through a network of shell corporations in Panama and Switzerland. His job was simple: to become Kamel Amin Thabet. He spent his days making business deals and his nights hosting extravagant parties, his apartment filled with diplomats, businessmen, and military attachés. He became a fixture in the Syrian-Argentine social scene, cultivating an image as a charismatic, slightly flamboyant businessman with deep pockets and even deeper patriotic fervor. He spoke endlessly of his desire to return to Damascus and serve the new Ba'athist regime. His most important target was a man named Sheikh Majid al-Ard, a prominent Syrian publisher and political influencer living in exile. Al-Ard was a kingmaker, a man with connections to the highest levels of the Syrian government. Kemal targeted him methodically, flattering him, funding his political publications, and becoming his most ardent supporter. He was investing in his own infiltration. After a year, the legend was solid. Kemal Amin Thabet was a known entity, a man whose name was mentioned in conversations in the cafes of Buenos Aires and the government offices of Damascus. The time had come for the next phase. The plan for Kemal Amin Thabet's insertion into Syria was meticulously crafted. It was not a covert border crossing in the dead of night. It was a grand arrival. In 1962, he moved his business from Buenos Aires to Damascus. He arrived not as a shadow, but as a returning son, a wealthy patriot coming home. The groundwork he had laid in Argentina paid off immediately. Sheikh Majid al-Ard, now back in favor with the regime, welcomed him with open arms, introducing him to his network of powerful friends. Kemal rented a luxurious apartment in the Abu Rumaneh district, directly across from the Syrian Army's General Staff headquarters. It was an act of supreme, calculated audacity. His living room window provided a direct line of sight into the nerve center of the Syrian military. He continued to host lavish parties, which soon became the talk of Damascus. They were a nexus of power, attended by high-ranking military officers, government ministers, and influential businessmen. In a paranoid, austere regime, Kemal's apartment was an oasis of fine French liquor, Cuban cigars, and, most importantly, loose talk. He never asked direct questions. He simply listened, a charming and generous host. He learned about troop movements from a drunken colonel complaining about logistics. He learned about political infighting from two rival ministers trying to win his financial support. He learned about new Soviet weapons systems from an Air Force general boasting about the performance of his new MiGs. Every night, after his guests had departed, the real work began. The tools of his trade were a marvel of miniaturized technology, custom-built by Mossad's technical division, the Mossad. His primary communication device was the A7 microburst transmitter, disguised inside the base of an expensive Braun electric shaver. It compressed the data into a high-speed, frequency-hopping burst lasting less than 5 seconds, making it incredibly difficult to detect. The messages were encrypted using one-time pads, sheets of highly flammable nitrocellulose paper filled with random 5-digit key groups, disguised as pages in a volume of Arabic poetry. His camera was a German-made Minox B, smaller than a pack of gum, concealed within a custom-built Dunhill cigarette lighter. The film was developed using a kit of monobath chemicals hidden in a can of Barbasol shaving cream. The developed negatives were then hidden in the hollowed-out backs of a set of antique ivory dominoes, ready to be sent out via diplomatic pouch. The process was a high-wire act of constant, nerve-shredding tension. He established a rigid routine. Transmissions were always at 02:15 a.m. The theory was that security would be at its most lax. But in early 1963, Mossad's Signals Intelligence Unit, Unit 8200, detected a massive upgrade in Syrian counterintelligence capabilities. The Soviets had provided them with state-of-the-art Krug radio direction finding systems. An intelligence report landed on Mir Ahmet's desk. It was blunt. The A7's transmission window is no longer secure. The Krug system can acquire a target lock in under 15 seconds. A standard 5-second burst gives them a window. A narrow one, but it exists. The tech team in Tel Aviv went into overdrive. The solution was tactical. Kemal's handler sent him a new set of instructions. encrypted in a broadcast of classical music on a specific shortwave radio frequency. The instructions were to abandon the fixed transmission schedule. From now on, his broadcast times would be randomized, dictated by a complex algorithm based on phases of the moon and stock market closing prices from London. They also sent him, via diplomatic pouch, a new directional Yagi antenna disguised as a modern art sculpture, which focused the radio signal into a tight beam aimed at Mount Hermon, drastically reducing the signal spill. It was a constant, invisible war of measures and countermeasures. Then came the first major setback. On March 8, 1963, a violent coup rocked Syria. The Ba'ath Party's military committee consolidated its power, purging its rivals. One morning, Kamel woke to find that his primary contact and sponsor, Sheikh Majid al-Ard, had been arrested. His entire network, meticulously built over 2 years, was gone overnight. He was isolated, exposed. Protocol dictated he should go to ground. Kamel did the opposite. He saw the chaos as an opportunity. He walked directly into the Lion's Den, the Ministry of Defense, and requested a meeting with the new strongman, General Amin al-Hafiz. He presented himself as a simple patriot, duped by al-Ard, but whose loyalty to Syria was absolute. He offered his fortune, his international contacts, everything, to the new regime. It was an audacious gamble. Al-Hafiz, a man deeply suspicious of everyone, was intrigued. He checked Kamel's background. The legend Shamir had built was flawless. Al-Hafiz saw in Kamel a useful tool, an untainted civilian who could move in circles his military men could not. He not only accepted Kamel's loyalty, he embraced it. Kamel Amin Thabet went from being the friend of a disgraced politician to the personal confidant of the most powerful man in Syria. He was now closer to the sun than he had ever dreamed possible. But this new proximity brought new dangers. In late 1964, a second crisis erupted. During a routine transmission, a key filtering capacitor in the A7's power converter shorted out with a pop and a wisp of acrid smoke. The unit was dead. He was deaf and dumb. This failure couldn't have come at a worse time. He had just returned from a meeting where Al-Hafiz had outlined a new, comprehensive plan for the Jordan River diversion, complete with engineering schematics. This information was pure gold. It had to get to Tel Aviv immediately. Waiting for a replacement part would take weeks. He sent a coded technical failure alert using a secondary, extremely short-range system hidden in his car's cigarette lighter, which activated a listening post in the Israeli embassy. The reply came 2 nights later, embedded in the static of Radio Cairo. A voice reading commodity prices was his signal. He recorded it and later, using a spectral analysis chart, decoded the instructions. The engineers in Tel Aviv believed he could perform a field repair. It was a bypass, a dangerous and delicate piece of microsurgery. Source 0.5 microfarad ceramic capacitor. Standard component in Philips brand transistor radios, model 22RLL383. Solder to bypass fried C117 capacitor. Use minimal heat. The task was a nightmare. First, he had to acquire the radio without raising suspicion. He couldn't just buy one. The purchase might be noted. Instead, he cultivated a low-level clerk at the Ministry of Information, a man named Farouk who was perpetually short of cash. Over a game of backgammon, Kamel accidentally broke Farouk's cheap radio. He insisted on replacing it, buying him a new expensive Grundig and taking the broken Philips off his hands. Inside his apartment, with the curtains drawn, he dismantled the radio, his hands sweating as he extracted the minuscule capacitor. The soldering was the hardest part. He had no proper tools. He used a nail heated over his gas stove, held with pliers. One slip, one tremor, and he could permanently destroy the A7's main board. For 2 hours, he worked under a magnifying glass, the smell of melting solder filling the room, the engineer's voices a dispassionate echo in his mind. Finally, he was done. He reassembled the shaver, took a deep breath, and pressed the test button. A single solid green light blinked on for a second, then off. It worked. He had a voice again. Just as he recovered from one crisis, a third, more terrifying one materialized. A ghost from Alexandria. His name was Musa Alfi, a man Eli Cohen had known from a Zionist youth group in the early 1950s. Alfi was a weak man, a gambler who had fled Egypt one step ahead of his creditors. One afternoon, Kamel was in the lobby of the Damascus Sheraton, meeting a French businessman, when he saw him. Alfi, looking shabby and desperate, was trying to sell cheap textiles to the hotel's gift shop manager. Their eyes met across the polished marble floor. For a split second, Kamel saw a flicker of recognition in Alfi's eyes, then confusion, then a dawning, greedy realization. Kamel coolly finished his meeting and left, his blood running cold. That night, a note was slipped under his apartment door. Eli, my old friend, we have much to discuss. Let's meet for old time's sake. Your friend Musa. It was a blackmail attempt, clumsy but lethal. In Tel Aviv, the message relayed by Kamel caused a firestorm. Shamir was blunt. The liability must be removed, immediately. An asset will be sent. Amit disagreed. No, sending a team in is too risky. It could expose everything. He has to handle it. This is the test. They argued for hours. The final decision was left to Kamel. He was on his own. Kamel arranged a meeting. Not in a dark alley, but at his own lavish apartment. He played the part of the powerful, amused benefactor. He let Alfi talk, a torrent of self-pity and veiled threats. Kamel listened patiently. He didn't deny being Eli. Instead, he spun a new layer to his legend. He told Alfi that yes, he was Eli Cohen, but that Eli Cohen was a cover. He was a deep cover agent, not for Israel, but for Syrian intelligence. His mission in Egypt had been to monitor Zionist groups for Damascus. His new identity as Kamel Thabet was a reward for his service. He was a patriot, serving the Arab cause. To prove it, he offered Alfi a job. Syria needs men like you, Musa. Men with your background. I can get you a position, good pay, a new life. All you have to do is be loyal. It was a masterful psychological play. He turned the blackmailer's greed into a tool of control. Alfi, overwhelmed by the grand conspiracy he had stumbled into and dazzled by the promise of wealth, eagerly agreed. He was now Kamel's asset, a pawn he could move around the board. Kamel gave him a menial job in his import-export company and paid him handsomely for useless information, turning the liability into a controlled, albeit dangerous, part of his cover. The threat was contained, but it was a constant, simmering source of tension, a loose cannon on the deck of his meticulously run operation. The apex of Kamel Amin Thabet's career, the moment that would seal his legacy and change the course of Middle Eastern history, arrived on a clear, sun-drenched morning in the spring of 1965. General Amin al-Hafiz, now effectively the ruler of Syria, had taken a special liking to the charismatic businessman. In a gesture of ultimate trust, he invited Kamel on a personal tour of Syria's greatest military achievement, the Golan Heights fortifications. This was the holy of holies. For Kamel, It was the moment his entire mission had been building towards. He sat in,